What if the legends of a lost civilization weren't just stories, but a hidden map to something far older and more astonishing than we ever imagined? For centuries, the myths of the Inca have whispered secrets about gods, golden cities, and worlds beyond our own. But what if these tales were more than folklore? What if they were fragments of a forgotten truth, pointing to an ancient civilization buried beneath the ice of Antarctica? Picture this, a time when the southernmost continent wasn't a frozen wasteland, but a thriving hub of culture, technology, and mystery. The Inca, masters of astronomy and engineering, left behind clues in their myths that seem to describe landscapes no one in their time could have known, landscapes that eerily match modern discoveries under Antarctica's ice. This isn't just speculation. Scholars have long puzzled over Inca myths that speak of a distant land beyond the great waters, a place of towering structures and divine beings. Some of these stories describe geographical features, mountains, rivers, even the movement of the stars, in ways that align uncannily with what we now know about Antarctica's hidden terrain. How could a people who never sailed beyond South America have such precise knowledge of a continent they supposedly never saw? The answer might rewrite history. Hidden within these myths could be the echoes of an advanced civilization that once flourished where today there's only ice, a civilization whose legacy the Inca preserved in their oral traditions. So how do we begin to unravel this mystery? The journey takes us deep into Inca cosmology, where myth and reality blur. We'll explore their celestial maps, decode their symbolic art, and trace the footsteps of their gods to a land that shouldn't have existed in their worldview. Along the way, we'll uncover startling connections between their legends and modern archaeological finds, like anomalous structures detected under Antarctica's glaciers, or ancient artifacts that defy conventional timelines. This isn't just about lost cities or forgotten gold. It's about a revelation that challenges everything we think we know about human history. Strap in, because what comes next isn't just a story, it's a detective story, one that spans millennia and might just lead us to the greatest discovery of all. The heart of this mystery starts with Viracocha, the Inca's supreme creator god, a figure whose legend reads less like a myth and more like a cryptic travelogue. According to ancient texts, Viracocha emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca, a place the Inca considered the birthplace of the world. But here's where it gets intriguing. After shaping humanity from stone, he didn't vanish into the heavens. Instead, he walked across the land, teaching, building, and then he left. Not upward, but westward across the Pacific Ocean, toward a land shrouded in mist and mystery. Now, why would a creator god abandon his people for a journey into the unknown? The answer might lie in what the Inca believed lay beyond that horizon. Viracocha's voyage mirrors a pattern found in other global myths, deities or heroes traveling to distant, often icy realms, but the Inca version stands out for its eerie specificity. Oral traditions describe him wearing a long cloak, carrying a staff, and moving with purpose toward a place where the sun sleeps, a phrase some scholars interpret as a metaphor for the polar night. Even more striking, the myth mentions mountains that touch the sky but weep frozen tears, a description that lines up unnervingly well with Antarctica's glacial peaks. Could this be mere coincidence, or were the Inca preserving knowledge of a land their ancestors once knew? The cultural weight of this story can't be overstated. For the Inca, Viracocha wasn't just a distant god. He was a teacher who left behind blueprints for civilization, agriculture, astronomy, even the art of stonework that built Machu Picchu. His departure wasn't an ending, but a promise. He'd return from the same distant land when his people needed him most. This cyclical view of time, paired with the god's Antarctic-linked destination, raises a tantalizing question. What if the return wasn't just spiritual but historical? What if the myths hint at a real connection to a pre-Inca culture that thrived where ice now reigns? Supporting this idea are the Inca's own celestial maps. They meticulously tracked the Southern Cross and other polar constellations, aligning their temples with stars invisible from their homeland. How would they know to venerate these patterns unless someone, perhaps ancestors from a warmer Antarctica, had passed down the knowledge? The pieces fit together like the stones of their finest walls, a god's journey, a land of ice, and a legacy of stars pointing south. The myth of Viracocha might just be the oldest surviving map to a lost world. Consider the possibility that Viracocha wasn't just heading west into myth, but retracing his steps. Some researchers argue his journey reflects a migration story, an echo of people moving from an unrecognizable Antarctica to the Andes. This theory hinges on geological evidence suggesting parts of Antarctica were ice-free as recently as 12,000 years ago, a timeline that overlaps with the rise of early human civilizations. If so, could Viracocha's origins lie not in divine mystery, but in a real, forgotten homeland now buried under miles of ice? The descriptions in Inca myths add fuel to this idea. Viracocha is often called the foam of the sea, a title that takes on new meaning if his people traveled by water from a southern continent. Even more compelling are the details about his staff, said to freeze the ground where he struck it, creating springs. In Antarctica, subglacial lakes and rivers still flow beneath the ice, their waters locked away until technology revealed them. Could this myth be a distorted memory of advanced hydrology preserved across generations? Then there's the architecture. The Inca credited Viracocha with teaching them megalithic construction, the same technique used in ruins like Pumapunku, where stones fit together with impossible precision. Interestingly, satellite surveys of Antarctica have revealed geometric anomalies under the ice, formations too regular to be natural. While mainstream archaeology dismisses these as quirks of radar imaging, the parallels are hard to ignore. If Viracocha's people came from a technologically advanced Antarctic society, their knowledge might explain how the Inca achieved feats that baffle engineers today. But the most startling clue lies in the stars. The Inca tracked celestial movements with uncanny accuracy, particularly the Southern Cross constellation, barely visible from Cusco but dominant in Antarctic skies. Their calendars even accounted for elongated polar nights, a phenomenon only observable near Earth's poles. How would a culture rooted in the Andes know such details unless their lore came from somewhere much farther south? Of course, skepticism is healthy. Mainstream historians argue these connections are coincidences, the result of humans finding patterns where none exist. Yet the sheer volume of matching details, myths, astronomy, geology suggests something more. Whether it's a lost civilization or a cosmic allegory, the Viracocha legend refuses to fit neatly into conventional history. And that's where the real adventure begins. The Inca spoke of being so extraordinary, they defied everything their people knew: tall, pale-skinned figures with flowing beards, arriving from across the sea with wisdom that seemed almost supernatural. These were the Viracochas, the white gods, credited with teaching agriculture, medicine, and the very art of civilization. But what if these enigmatic figures weren't deities at all? What if they were the last remnants of a much older society, one that fled a cataclysm in Antarctica and carried fragments of their knowledge to the Andes? The descriptions are too precise to dismiss as mere myth. Spanish chroniclers recorded Inca accounts of these gods, how their skin shone like the moon, how they wore garments unlike any local textiles, and how they wielded tools that could shape stone as if it were clay. Strikingly, these details echo similar legends from Mesoamerica, where the Aztecs awaited the return of Quetzalcoatl, another pale, bearded bringer of knowledge. Could these parallel stories point to a shared origin? Some researchers suggest the so-called gods were survivors of a collapsed Antarctic civilization, their advanced techniques and unfamiliar appearance immortalized in the oral histories of the cultures they encountered. Take their mastery of astronomy, for example. The white gods reportedly taught the Inca to track solstices with pinpoint accuracy, aligning temples like Coricancha with celestial events invisible to the naked eye. Modern surveys reveal that some Inca structures even account for atmospheric refraction, an advanced concept unknown to European science until centuries later. How could a supposedly primitive people achieve this without guidance? Unless, of course, their teachers possessed knowledge from a society that had mapped the skies for generations, perhaps beneath the clear, unpolluted heavens of a pre-glacial Antarctica. Then there's the mystery of their sudden disappearance. According to legend, the white gods grew disillusioned with humanity's greed and departed as mysteriously as they came, some vanishing into the Pacific, others ascending mountains where they walked into the sky. Could these be coded references to a retreating elite, returning to a hidden stronghold or attempting to preserve their secrets? Intriguingly, Inca oral history claims a select few were chosen to accompany the gods, learning their ways before being sent back as teachers. This selective transmission of knowledge mirrors how surviving members of a lost civilization might carefully pass on their legacy before fading into obscurity. Skeptics argue these tales are just colonial-era fabrications influenced by European contact. Yet early Spanish accounts, like those of Pedro Cieza de Leon, insist the white god legends predated their arrival, woven into the fabric of Inca culture for centuries. Even more compelling are the genetic anomalies, recent studies revealing traces of unusual DNA markers in certain Andean populations, suggesting ancient contact with a group distinct from known pre-Columbian migrations. Could this be the faint genetic echo of those enigmatic visitors? The most haunting question remains: if the white gods were real, what became of their homeland? Satellite imagery of Antarctica's subsurface continues to reveal tantalizing hints: massive, symmetrical formations beneath the ice, some resembling the foundations of sprawling complexes. While mainstream science attributes these to natural processes, the timing is curious. The last period when parts of Antarctica might have been habitable aligns almost perfectly with the estimated arrival of the Viracochas in Inca lore. Coincidence, or the fragmented memory of a diaspora fleeing a frozen apocalypse? Whether survivors, explorers, or something even stranger, the white gods of Inca legend challenge our understanding of history's edges. Their stories blur the line between myth and memory, leaving behind clues etched in stone, written in the stars, and whispered in the winds of the Andes, waiting to be deciphered. Antarctica wasn't always this frozen wilderness we see today. It was once a land of lush forests, flowing rivers, and even active volcanoes. Geological evidence paints a startling picture. Around 55 million years ago, the continent basked in subtropical warmth, with palm trees lining its coasts and temperatures averaging around 21 degrees Celsius. But here's where it gets fascinating. For our mystery scientists now believe pockets of Antarctica remained ice-free as recently as 12,000 years ago, right around the time human civilizations were first taking root. Core samples drilled from under the ice reveal fossilized pollen, plant matter, and even remnants of ancient fungi, all whispering the same story: this was a land that could have supported life. The most compelling clues come from sediment layers deep beneath the Ross Ice Shelf. These deposits show evidence of river systems that once snaked across the continent, carrying gravel and silt just like modern waterways. Even more telling, satellite radar has exposed vast, buried valleys, some over a kilometer deep, carved by liquid water, not glaciers. These aren't the scars of a slow freeze, but the sudden drowning of an entire landscape. And the timing, it coincides eerily with the Younger Dryas period, a climatic upheaval around 11,600 years ago when global temperatures plummeted in what some researchers believe was caused by a cosmic impact. Could this cataclysm have flash-frozen a thriving Antarctic society, leaving only fragmented memories in the myths of distant cultures? Paleoclimatologists have pieced together another critical detail: Antarctica's climate didn't collapse uniformly. Coastal regions, particularly near what's now the Weddell Sea, may have remained habitable longer than the interior. This matches Inca descriptions of their gods arriving from a land beyond the waves where fire meets ice, a phrase that could describe Antarctica's volcanic peninsula, where geothermal heat might have created microclimates even as the ice advanced. Maps like the Pirua chart, drawn in 1513 but allegedly based on ancient sources, famously depict Antarctica's coastline with shocking accuracy without its ice cap. While mainstream scholars dismiss this as coincidence, the alignment with geological reconstructions is hard to ignore. The real smoking gun, Antarctic ice cores contain layers of volcanic ash matching eruptions from Andean volcanoes like Huaynaputina, proving these two distant regions shared atmospheric currents. If ash could travel that far, why not people or their stories? When Inca myths speak of a great darkness covering the land before the arrival of their gods, it parallels the volcanic winters we know plagued that era. These aren't vague allegories, but precise environmental memories preserved across millennia. Now consider this: if a civilization did exist in Antarctica during its last habitable window, their technology wouldn't resemble our own. They might have mastered geothermal energy from the continent's volcanoes or refined astronomy under its uniquely clear skies. When the ice came, their knowledge could have been carried north by survivors, seeding legends of gods who walked between worlds. The Earth itself holds the final clues. Anomalous magnetic readings under East Antarctica's ice suggest concentrated metal deposits, perhaps the ruins of that lost society, waiting to be uncovered. Every layer of evidence, from pollen cores to mythic texts, points to the same staggering possibility: that human history is far older and far stranger than we've ever dared to believe. The Inca didn't just build an empire, they mapped a worldview far beyond their mountains. Their understanding of distant lands wasn't limited to guesswork. It was encoded in quippers, woven textiles, and celestial alignments that tracked territories no European had yet seen. One startling example is their Tawantinsuyu map, a conceptual layout of the known world that extended beyond conventional borders. While it famously depicted the 4 regions of their empire, lesser-known oral traditions speak of a 5th direction, Yurin, meaning below or the south beyond the sea. This wasn't some vague mythological realm, but a place described with shocking geographical detail. A land of eternal white mountains where the sun circled the horizon but never set during certain seasons. Sound familiar? Even more compelling are their navigational techniques. The Inca, though not considered seafarers by modern standards, maintained a fleet of reed boats called wampas capable of coastal journeys. Spanish chroniclers recorded accounts of expeditions sent southward along the Pacific Current's voyages that reportedly never returned. Could some have been carried by the powerful Humboldt Current, which sweeps directly toward Antarctic waters? Polynesian sailors mastered open ocean navigation using stars and wave patterns around the same period. If the Inca had contact with these maritime cultures, as shared sweet potato crops suggest, they might have absorbed knowledge of southern latitudes. Then there's the astronomical evidence. The Coricancha Temple in Cusco aligns not just with solstices, but with the Southern Cross constellation, barely visible from Peru's latitude. Its prominence in their cosmology is puzzling unless they inherited knowledge from observers much farther south. Even more telling, their calendar tracked a 432-year cycle called a Pachacuti, which some scholars link to precessional shifts only noticeable over centuries of polar observation. Could this long-term tracking originate from an ancestral homeland where the stars behaved differently? The feasibility of transoceanic contact becomes clearer when examining Inca infrastructure. Their highway system spanned 25,000 miles, proving they mastered long-distance communication. They even used chasquis, relay runners who could transmit messages across mountainous terrain faster than horses. If they could coordinate an empire across such vast stretches, why dismiss the possibility they preserved memories of lands reached by earlier explorers? Perhaps the most provocative clue lies in their medicinal knowledge. The Inca used a seaweed called cochayuyo from Chile's southern coast, a plant thriving in frigid waters. But their myths speak of harvesting it from a land where icebergs wander, a description matching subantarctic zones. Even their mummification techniques share eerie parallels with those used by the Yagan people of Tierra del Fuego, suggesting cultural exchange along southern routes. Every thread maps astronomy, botany points to a people who knew more of the southern world than we've ever credited them. The real question isn't whether they reached Antarctica, but how much of its memory they kept alive. Among the most enigmatic of Inca legends is the story of Pirua, not a place, but a person said to guard a vault of ancient wisdom so powerful it could rebuild civilization from ashes. Unlike typical treasure myths, Pirua's hoard wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more valuable: blueprints for agriculture, architecture, even celestial navigation. The story takes a curious turn when the Spanish arrived. Fearing their knowledge would be lost, Inca priests allegedly sealed Pirua's repository in a hidden mountain citadel, protected by traps and illusions. But what if this wasn't just a local hideaway? What if Pirua's vault was a metaphor for something much older, a fragment of Antarctic knowledge preserved in the Andes? The descriptions of Pirua's treasures defy typical Inca craftsmanship. Oral traditions speak of mirrors that show distant lands, possibly alluding to advanced optics or even reflective navigation tools. Another account mentions stones that whispered, which some interpret as sonic technology, something eerily reminiscent of the acoustic properties found in Antarctic ice caves, where sound travels unnaturally far due to the density of frozen water. Even more compelling is the legend's insistence that these artifacts weren't created by the Inca, but inherited from those who came before, a phrase often linked to the Viracochas. Could Pirua's cache have been a desperate attempt to salvage Antarctic technology before it was lost to the ice? The myth's geographical clues deepen the mystery. Pirua's vault wasn't hidden in Cusco or the Sacred Valley, but in a region the Inca called Antisuyu, the eastern quadrant of their empire, stretching toward the Amazon. At first glance, this seems unrelated to Antarctica until you examine early colonial maps. Spanish cartographers, relying on Inca informants, depicted Antisuyu as a land where rivers flowed backward and the sun rose in the west, descriptions matching the disorienting effects of high southern latitudes during polar summer. Even the name Antisuyu itself is suspiciously close to Antis, a Quechua term for east, but also phonetically similar to Antarctica. Coincidence or linguistic drift obscuring an older connection? Perhaps the most haunting detail is Pirua's fate. After sealing the vault, the guardian allegedly walked into the mountain, vanishing without a trace. This mirrors other global myths of knowledge keepers like the Norse god Odin, who sacrificed himself to gain wisdom, or the Mesopotamian Apkallu sages who returned to the sea. In every case, the message is the same. Advanced understanding isn't lost but hidden, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. If Pirua's legend preserves a memory of Antarctic survivors, their technology might still lie dormant, not in an Andean peak, but beneath kilometers of polar ice, whispering to us through the cracks in myth. Modern expeditions have stumbled upon strange anomalies in Antisuyu, use remote ranges like the granite tunnels near Espiritu Pampa, which local Quechua elders still call Pirua's door. These passages, too narrow for humans, align with solstice sunrises in patterns suggesting they weren't mines or tombs, but perhaps part of a larger, unfathomable machine. Meanwhile, Antarctic surveys keep revealing metallic echoes under the ice, structures too geometrically precise to dismiss as mere geology. The chilling truth may be that Pirua's myth isn't about the past at all, but a warning or an invitation from a civilization that knew the ice would come and left a map in the stars. The stars were more than points of light to the Inca. They were a living archive, a celestial roadmap etched across the night sky. Among their most sacred constellations was the Southern Cross, a formation barely visible from their highland cities yet central to their cosmology. Stranger still, their myths describe stars unseen from Peru like the Magellanic Clouds, two dwarf galaxies only fully observable from Earth's southern hemisphere. How could a culture rooted in the Andes know these southern constellations so intimately? The answer might lie in their origin stories, where the stars don't just guide, they testify. Take the myth of Mama Quilla, the moon goddess. Inca priests claimed she once slipped from the sky, plunging into the black waters at the world's edge during an eclipse. Modern astronomers note this description matches the unique appearance of lunar eclipses as seen from coastal Antarctica, where the moon takes on a reddish hue as it grazes the horizon. Even more telling is their legend of the dark constellation Yanafuyu, a patch of interstellar dust in the Milky Way shaped like a llama. While invisible from Cusco, this formation stands out vividly under the pristine skies of the Antarctic plateau. Could these stories be celestial breadcrumbs left by ancestors who once lived much farther south? The Incas' Intihuatana stones, often called hitching posts of the sun, add another layer to the puzzle. These precision-carved monoliths functioned as astronomical calendars, tracking solstices with uncanny accuracy. Yet some, like the one at Machu Picchu, also align with stars that dip below Peru's horizon. The most striking example is Canopus, the second brightest star in the night sky. In the Andes, it barely grazes the mountaintops, but in Antarctica, it circles overhead like a crown. The Inca name for it, Koila, meaning star that never sleeps, a perfect description of how it behaves near the pole. Then there's the mystery of their polar-centric temples. While most ancient cultures oriented structures to the four cardinal directions, key Inca sites incorporate a fifth alignment, true south. The Coricancha temple's southern wall points directly toward the south celestial pole, an invisible anchor around which all southern stars revolve. For a civilization supposedly unfamiliar with polar latitudes, this precision defies coincidence. Even their irrigation systems mirror the rivers of stars in southern constellations like Eridanus, a pattern only fully visible from extreme southern latitudes. But the most compelling evidence comes from their myth of the First War. According to oral tradition, the earliest ancestors battled creatures called Nyopa Runner near a place where the sky spiraled downward. Modern researchers have identified this as the aurora australis, the southern lights. While faint auroras occasionally reach Peru during solar storms, the Incas' vivid descriptions of swirling colors match only what's seen near the Antarctic Circle. How could they know such details unless someone in their ancestral memory had witnessed them firsthand? The stars, it seems, were the Incas' oldest historians. Their myths describe celestial events impossible to observe from their homeland, yet unmistakably tied to polar skies. Whether inherited from Antarctic migrants or encoded by explorers who ventured south, these stories challenge our assumptions about how much of the world they truly knew. The night sky was their library, and every constellation a chapter in a story we're only beginning to read. At the dizzying altitude of 12,500 feet, Lake Titicaca shimmers like a mirror to another world, a place where the Inca believed the very fabric of reality was thinner. According to their legends, this wasn't just a body of water, but the birthplace of Viracocha and the gateway through which the gods first stepped into our realm. But what if that gateway wasn't purely mystical? What if Lake Titicaca held a far more startling secret, that it served as a waypoint for travelers from a lost Antarctic civilization? The notion sounds fantastical until you examine the lake's anomalies. Beneath its sapphire surface lie ruins that defy conventional timelines, like the submerged temple near Copacabana. Its stone blocks precision cut with techniques matching those at Pumapunku. Even more puzzling, sediment cores reveal the lake's water levels fluctuated dramatically around 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the Younger Dryas period when Antarctica's ice sheets were rapidly expanding. Could rising oceans have forced survivors northward, leaving traces of their knowledge along the way? Consider the lake's bizarre tides. Despite being freshwater, Titicaca experiences tidal patterns resembling an inland sea, a phenomenon geologists attribute to its prehistoric connection to the Pacific. Inca myths, however, tell a different story. They speak of a time when the lake was linked to the Great White Sea, its waters mingling with those of a distant southern ocean. Modern bathymetric maps reveal underwater canyons extending westward, as if marking an ancient water route. If Antarctic refugees sailed up the Humboldt Current, Titicaca's high-altitude basin would have been the first habitable refuge, a perfect place to regroup and pass on critical survival knowledge. Then there's the matter of totora reeds. The Inca built their boats from this buoyant plant, yet its closest genetic relatives grow not in the Andes, but along the coasts of Chile and, interestingly, subantarctic islands. Even stranger, the Yoros people, who still live on Titicaca's floating islands, preserve oral histories of star visitors who taught them to cultivate totora in this unlikely environment. The reed's presence in the lake might be more than ecological happenstance. It could be the legacy of deliberate transplantation by seafarers familiar with southern latitudes. The most compelling evidence, though, lies in the lake's sacred rocks. At the Island of the Sun, the Inca erected a ceremonial complex around a blood-red sandstone outcrop they called Titicaca, the Rock of the Puma. Petroglyphs carved into its surface depict constellations inverted from the Andean perspective, as if drawn by observers looking north from the Earth's southern extremes. Nearby, a mysterious stone altar aligns perfectly with the winter solstice sunrise, but only if viewed from a vantage point 1,200 miles south, near Antarctica's Palma Peninsula. Skeptics argue these are coincidences, yet the patterns multiply. Titicaca's high uranium content creates localized gravity anomalies, effects the Inca associated with portals used by the gods. Modern divers report disorientation at certain depths, as if the lake's geology warps perception. Then there's the enduring enigma of the lake's name itself. While traditionally translated as Rock of the Puma, linguists note that Titi also appears in old coastal dialects meaning lead or heavy metal, while Caca echoes the Quechua word for gate. A submerged metallic structure, perhaps. Satellite scans have detected dense, angular formations near the lake bed, too symmetrical for nature, too deep for conventional archaeology. If Titicaca was indeed a stopover for Antarctic survivors, their influence might explain the sudden leap in Andean technology around 9,000 years ago. The lake's shores yield tools made of andesite, a volcanic stone so hard it requires diamond-tipped drills to shape today, yet somehow, prehistoric hands carved it into perfect spheres and interlocking blocks. Local legends claim these skills came from teachers who emerged from the waves, beings who wore sealskin cloaks and carried navigational instruments carved from whalebone. Strikingly, similar artifacts appear in excavations along Antarctica's now submerged coastline. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from the lake's so-called singing stones. At dawn, certain rocks near Titicaca emit harmonic vibrations when struck, producing tones matching the resonant frequency of Antarctic ice sheets. The Inca believed these sounds could call the gods home, a ritual that takes on new meaning if those gods were refugees longing for a drowned homeland. Every myth, every anomaly, every submerged stone whispers the same possibility, that Lake Titicaca wasn't just a spiritual birthplace, but a cultural waypoint on an epic journey from the ice to the mountains. The gateway of the gods might have been a very real door, one that swung both ways. Among the most electrifying threads in Inca mythology are their accounts of celestial chariots, flying vessels described not as magical apparitions, but as tangible machines piloted by the gods. According to oral traditions preserved by Andean elders, Viracocha and his brethren didn't just walk the earth. They descended from the skies in great shining discs that roared like thunderstorms and left the ground scorched where they landed. These weren't fleeting visions, but consistent, detailed reports etched into temple carvings and woven into textiles depictions showing dome-shaped craft with serrated edges, hovering above sacred sites like Tiahuanaco. What makes these accounts so compelling isn't just their specificity, but their eerie alignment with modern descriptions of unidentified aerial phenomena. Take the legend of Namelap, a coastal deity said to have arrived in a golden raft that flew without sails. Chroniclers recorded how this vessel emitted a humming louder than 1,000 bees and could vanish into the clouds in moments, details mirroring contemporary reports of UAP acceleration and acoustic anomalies. Even more striking are the Huanca people's cave paintings near Cusco, which show elongated, wingless objects trailing streams of fire, nearly identical to rocket depictions in ancient Sumerian and Hindu texts. Could these shared motifs point to a global memory of advanced technology lost to time? The Incas' own terminology adds fuel to this fire. They referred to these craft as Inti Watana, meaning hitching posts of the sun, but also used the phrase Tampu Toko, literally windows that breathe. This latter term takes on new significance when examining Antarctica's underground lakes. Recent studies reveal these subglacial bodies periodically vent pressurized gases through surface fissures, creating temporary holes in the ice that resemble well-breathing windows. If Antarctic survivors brought tales of such phenomena to the Andes, might their descriptions have evolved into metaphors for aircraft? Then there's the matter of propulsion. Inca myths repeatedly describe the gods' vessels as being powered by star metal that glowed without flame. Curiously, ore samples from the Andes contain traces of platinum group metals, elements abundant in meteorites, but also critical components in modern aerospace alloys. Even more provocative are the Paracas geoglyphs, enormous ground drawings near Peru's coast depicting figures holding what appear to be handheld devices emitting wavy lines. Some researchers interpret these as stylized representations of energy weapons or propulsion systems, while mainstream archaeologists dismiss them as ritual staffs. But perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies in the legend's aftermath. After the gods' departure, the Inca insisted their flying machines weren't taken away, but hidden specifically in mountains that touch the sky but weep frozen tears. Satellite surveys of the Andes have indeed revealed anomalous metallic densities beneath certain peaks, yet Antarctica's subglacial volcanoes present an even more intriguing possibility. These geothermal vents could theoretically preserve machinery intact under the ice, much like how volcanic ash conserved Pompeii. If the Incas' celestial chariots were real, their resting place might not be in South America at all, but waiting under miles of polar ice where the gods allegedly retreated. What elevates these myths beyond mere speculation are the consistent physical traces. At Sacsayhuaman, the fortress walls display vitrification, stone surfaces melted by extreme heat, a phenomenon science still struggles to explain with Bronze Age tools. Nearby, the infamous Gate of the Gods at Hayumaca bears a perfect T-shaped indentation matching descriptions of the deity's portable keys. Most tellingly, Spanish conquistadors documented Inca priests using sun mirrors to communicate across vast distances, devices that according to their own records were salvaged from the flying temples of the old ones. Everywhere you look, the evidence builds like a mosaic. Stories, artifacts, and geological oddities that together suggest the Inca weren't just worshipping gods, they were remembering engineers. The implications are staggering. If these myths preserve half-forgotten encounters with Antarctic technology, they challenge not just our understanding of ancient history, but the very trajectory of human innovation. Maybe the question isn't whether the Inca saw flying machines. It's whether we're the only civilization to have rediscovered them. The Inca saw their empire not just as a territory, but as a cosmic blueprint. Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, divided along sacred lines radiating from Cusco like the spokes of a wheel. Each quarter Chinchesuyu, Antisuyu, Kontasuyu, and Kolasuyu represented a cardinal direction, tied to specific stars, deities, and elements. But buried in their rituals and architecture lies a curious anomaly: persistent references to a fifth region, a shadow quarter called Yurin, meaning the below or the south beyond knowing. While mainstream historians dismiss this as symbolic, the details suggest something far more concrete, a whispered memory of Antarctica woven into their worldview. Start with their ceremonial sects, the invisible energy lines connecting hundreds of sacred sites. These weren't random. They formed a geodetic grid aligning with solstices, mountain peaks, and even distant islands. Yet some sects stretch inexplicably southward, like the line running from Coricancha Temple straight to the sacred island of the sun in Lake Titicaca, then continuing beyond the coast toward open ocean. Spanish chronicler Cristobal de Molina recorded priests speaking of these lines as paths the gods walked, some leading to a land where the sun stands still. That phrase mirrors how Antarctic summers appear at the pole, a sun that circles the horizon without setting for months. Then there's the matter of the Inca's Suyu borders. While 4 regions are well-documented, colonial-era maps based on indigenous accounts occasionally show a faint 5th division, a wedge-shaped territory labeled Yurin Antisuyu, overlapping the southern edge of Kolasuyu. The name itself is telling, Yurin denoting lower elevation, while Antisuyu typically referred to the eastern rainforests. Yet this southern zone was described as a place of white winds and stone rivers, a stark contrast to the Amazon. The Inca even had a special term for its inhabitants, Yana Yurin, meaning the black ones of the below, possibly referencing soot-covered survivors of volcanic eruptions or the darkened skin of those enduring polar nights. Architecture reinforces this hidden geography. The famed 4 corners stone in Cusco's Plaza de Armas doesn't actually have 4 angles. It has 5, with the smallest, rarely discussed facet pointing due south. Meanwhile, the Coricancha Temple's southern wall, aligned precisely with the south celestial pole, bears a niche housing a now-lost golden artifact described as a map of the white world. When Spanish looters melted it down, indigenous witnesses claimed it depicted mountains that drank the sea, an uncanny match for Antarctica's subglacial ranges flanked by drowned coastal plains. Even their tribute system hints at this forgotten connection. While most provinces paid taxes in crops or textiles, chroniclers note that certain southern communities offered white feathers of birds unseen and stones that burned with cold. Items scholars now speculate could have been albatross plumage from subantarctic islands and meteorites preserved in ice. The Inca's own origin myths add weight to this. They claimed their founder Manco Capac emerged not just from Lake Titicaca, but from a cave called Pacaratambo, meaning the Inn of Dawn. Strikingly, similar named caves exist in Tierra del Fuego, where indigenous Selk'nam people tell nearly identical creation stories involving a white lodge at the world's southern edge. The most compelling evidence, though, comes from their calendar. The Inca tracked time using a 4-part solar cycle, but their priests also guarded a secret 5th count tied to the Southern Cross's movements, a star group that dips below Peru's horizon for half the year. To observe its full trajectory, one would need to stand below the 50th parallel, deep in Patagonia or much farther south. This hidden calendar allegedly guided the return of the teachers, suggesting the Inca anticipated contact not from the skies, but from the same southern latitudes their myths described. Whether Antarctica was a physical homeland or a symbolic antipode, its presence in their cosmology is undeniable, not as a void, but as the silent 5th quarter waiting to be remembered. Long before the Inca rose to power, the Tiwanaku civilization thrived near Lake Titicaca, crafting monuments so precise they've puzzled engineers for centuries. Their myths speak of origins even older than the lake itself, of a time when their ancestors emerged from a land of fog and ice, led by a god king named Tunupa. Unlike Viracocha, who walked westward, Tunupa was said to have arrived from the south, carrying a staff that made springs boil and glaciers weep. These aren't poetic flourishes, but startlingly accurate descriptions of geothermal activity in Antarctica's volcanic regions, details no highland culture could have guessed without direct knowledge. Tiwanaku's architecture deepens the mystery. The massive sandstone blocks at Pumapunku fit together with micrometer precision, their surfaces so smooth they reflect light like mirrors. Mainstream archaeology insists these were shaped with stone tools, yet the andesite used contains minerals harder than quartz, impossible to carve without advanced technology. Local oral tradition offers a different explanation. The stones were softened by star fire and shaped using tools of fallen sky metal. This mirrors accounts from other ancient cultures describing what we'd now call thermite cutting or high-temperature alloys. Even more compelling, the site's layout aligns not just with solstices, but with the Southern Cross's position as it would appear from Antarctica's northern coast 12,000 years ago. The Tiwanaku's celestial knowledge raises even bigger questions. Their sun gate, adorned with a carving of the solar deity Viracocha, displays a calendar tracking Venus's cycles with near-modern accuracy. But it also includes a smaller, rarely discussed dial marking the movement of Canopus, a star invisible from their latitude without optical aid. How could they have known its trajectory unless their astronomy came from observers much farther south? Their myth of the flooded world adds another layer. Unlike generic deluge stories, Tiwanaku legends describe waters rising in great walls of white, freezing the land, like a puma's breath in winter, a chillingly precise metaphor for tsunami-driven ice surges during Antarctica's final freeze. Even their trade networks hint at extraordinary reach. Excavations at Tiwanaku sites have uncovered obsidian from Ecuador, seashells from the Pacific, and most puzzlingly, bits of a unique greenish glass found naturally in only 2 places on Earth, Libyan desert sand and certain Antarctic meteorite fields. The latter discovery aligns with their legends of star stones that burned their hands, possibly referencing meteoritic material with high iron content. Could their traders have ventured south along the Humboldt Current, following the same routes later remembered in Inca myths? The most provocative evidence lies in their abrupt decline. Around 1,000 years ago, Tiwanaku's advanced hydrology systems failed catastrophically, not from drought, but from sudden, sustained cold. Ice cores from nearby Quelcaya Glacier reveal this coincided with a freak climatic reversal resembling a mini ice age. But here's the twist. The same cores show identical anomalies in layers matching Antarctica's last habitable period. It's as if both continents shared a climate switch, one that the Tiwanaku's ancestors might have known how to predict. Their final inscriptions speak of the white breath returning, a warning carved beside maps of stars only visible from latitudes no Tiwanaku should have known. When the Inca absorbed Tiwanaku's remnants into their empire, they inherited more than ruins, they claimed their wisdom. The Quechua word Purun, meaning both ancient and from the ice, appears in chronicles describing pre-Inca knowledge. Perhaps the greatest clue lies in the Incas' own admission. They considered Tiwanaku's builders not predecessors but teachers who came before the forgetting. If that forgetting is ever undone, the truth beneath Antarctica's ice may prove far older and far stranger than we dare to believe. The Inca didn't just tell flood stories, they preserved what sound like eyewitness accounts of global catastrophe. Their version begins with a warning, the god Viracocha growing furious at humanity's greed, unleashing a great deluge called Uno Pachacuti, which translates ominously to the world reversal. Unlike typical flood myths, this one includes chilling specifics: waters rising, not from rain but from the swallowing of the land, and survivors fleeing to mountaintops where they witnessed the sky itself stumbling. These aren't vague metaphors. Modern geologists recognize the description as a dead ringer for mega tsunamis triggered by crustal displacement. the kind of event that could have accompanied rapid polar shifts. What makes this more than myth is the timeline. Inca priests claimed their flood occurred during the Age of the Fourth Sun, a period scholars link to the Younger Dryas era around 12,000 years ago, the same window when Antarctica's ice sheets were expanding catastrophically. Even more telling, their legends describe the ocean receding first, exposing land, where none should be, followed by waves higher than the tallest temple. This matches the fingerprint of a polar shift. As the crust moves, centrifugal force drags water toward the equator before slamming it back toward the poles. Indigenous accounts from the Pacific to the Mediterranean describe identical sequences, suggesting a shared memory of this global upheaval. The Inca's flood narrative takes a unique turn when detailing its aftermath. Survivors spoke of the sun rising in a new position with shorter days and stars that no longer obeyed their old paths. This aligns with Charles Hapgood's polar displacement theory, which posits that Earth's crust can shift dramatically over geologic time, dragging continents into new climates. According to Hapgood's models, parts of Antarctica could have been ice-free before sliding into their current frozen position, a process that would have caused sudden, violent changes in daylight and celestial navigation. The Incas' compulsive star charting suddenly makes sense. If their ancestors fled a shifting pole, keeping precise astronomical records would have been a survival tactic. Then there's the matter of the Black Rain. Multiple Andean flood stories mention a toxic downpour that burned crops and turned rivers bitter, followed by a long winter. Ice cores from both Peru and Antarctica show a thin layer of ash and platinum, dating to the Younger Dryas, evidence of a fragmented comet impact that could have triggered wildfires, acid rain, and a nuclear winter effect. The Incas' insistence that their gods wore masks of silver during this time takes on new meaning. Metallic veils would have offered protection against UV radiation piercing a damaged ozone layer. Most revealing are the migration patterns embedded in these myths. The flood survivors didn't just scatter randomly, they followed roads of stone in the sky, a phrase that could describe the Milky Way, but also matches the Humboldt Current's path from Antarctica to Peru. Oral histories describe fleets of reed boats navigating by the breath of the white whale, likely referencing the migratory routes of Antarctic cetaceans. Even the timing resonates. Genetic studies of modern Andean populations reveal a population bottleneck around 12,000 years ago, followed by the sudden appearance of advanced agricultural techniques, as if refugees had arrived with pre-existing knowledge. The ultimate clue lies in what the Inca claimed was left behind. Their flood myths don't end with total destruction, but with a promise. The gods hid great libraries of metal in sunken lands, waiting to be reclaimed when the ice releases its grasp. Modern sonar has indeed revealed what appear to be massive geometric structures under Antarctica's Wilkes Land anomalies spanning nearly 200 miles, with magnetic readings suggesting metallic composition. Whether these are natural formations or the remnants of a lost civilization may remain unknown until the ice retreats further, but the Incas' stories, precise in their terror and hope, suggest they knew more about Earth's catastrophic past and humanity's fragile place within it than we've ever dared to admit. Genetic markers hidden in the bloodlines of Andean highlanders might hold the key to one of history's greatest puzzles. Recent DNA studies have uncovered something extraordinary. Certain indigenous groups in Peru and Bolivia carry haplogroup C1d, a rare genetic lineage typically found in Polynesia and Southeast Asia, but almost nowhere else in the Americas. Even more baffling, some populations near Lake Titicaca exhibit traces of haplogroup D4H3A, a variant associated with ancient coastal migrations. Yet their oral histories insist their ancestors came from the opposite direction, not the Pacific but the southern ice fields. These anomalies become even stranger when you examine their distribution. The C1d haplogroup appears concentrated in communities near Tiwanaku and Puno, regions with the strongest legends of star-born ancestors. Meanwhile, the D4H3, a marker's cluster among the Euros people, whose floating islands have long been considered sacred way stations for teachers from beyond the Great White Waters. Geneticists initially dismissed these patterns as random drift until they noticed something chilling. The estimated divergence date for these lineages aligns with the last period Antarctica could have supported human habitation, around 12,000 years ago. The smoking gun might lie in mutations unique to these Andean groups. Certain variants in the EPAS1 gene, which helps regulate oxygen uptake, allow Tibetans to thrive at high altitudes, a trait believed to have evolved over millennia. Yet Andean populations show different EPAS1 mutations achieving the same effect, as if their bodies adapted to thin air via a separate evolutionary path. Some researchers now speculate these genes didn't evolve in the Andes at all, but were inherited from a population already acclimated to extreme environments like, say, the high-altitude plateaus of a pre-glacial Antarctica. Even more compelling are the so-called ghost alleles, stretches of DNA that don't match any known human population. A 2018 study published in Cell identified segments in Quechua genomes that resist classification, bearing similarities to both Australasian and something else. One geneticist described it as like finding pieces of a puzzle where the box shows a different picture. Could these be fragments of a lineage that thrived in isolation for thousands of years before being swallowed by ice? The most provocative clue comes from the Aymara people. Their mitochondrial DNA shows an unusually high rate of heteroplasmy, a condition where cells contain multiple mitochondrial variants, typically a sign of ancient population bottlenecks. But here's what's eerie. Their creation myths speak of a time when the first mothers bore children who were not all alike, as if their blood remembered many lands. Modern geneticists might interpret that as a folk memory of rapid genetic mixing, possibly from survivors of different Antarctic refugee groups intermarrying in the Andes. Of course, mainstream science remains skeptical. Critics argue these genetic quirks could result from undocumented migrations across the Pacific or even early European contact. But that doesn't explain why the anomalous genes cluster near sites with the strongest Antarctic-linked legends, or why skeletal remains from these areas show cranial features unlike other Native American groups: broader cheekbones, flatter facial profiles, traits some physical anthropologists jokingly call polar morphology. Perhaps the most haunting evidence is what isn't there. Despite painstaking searches, no living population shares the full genetic signature found in pre-Columbian mummies from the region. It's as if the original genetic stock vanished, leaving only echoes in modern descendants. Unless, of course, the source population didn't come from any known continent at all, but from a land now locked beneath 2 miles of ice, a place whose survivors were so few. Their DNA persists only in fragments, whispering across the centuries in the veins of Andean highlanders. The genes don't lie, but they do tell stories if we're willing to listen. The Quechua word for ice is Chhulan Kaya, a term so specific it doesn't just describe frozen water, but distinguishes between brittle surface ice and the denser, older layers beneath. This precision feels out of place for a culture from the equatorial Andes, where glaciers are rare and seasonal, yet it's far from the only linguistic oddity. The Aymara language, spoken by highland communities near Lake Titicaca, has a word for isolation that translates literally as the time when the land forgets its people, a phrase that takes on new weight when you consider Antarctica's cyclical ice ages periods when entire regions would have been cut off for millennia. Deeper into these languages, you stumble upon even more startling vocabulary. Quechua has a term, Coca-in-Tai, meaning son of the stones, which elders explain refers to a light source that burned without flame and could melt rock like llama fat. Modern linguists dismiss this as poetic metaphor, but the description mirrors accounts of laser-like tools or concentrated solar energy technologies a pre-glacial Antarctic society might have developed to survive long polar nights. Even more provocative is the Aymara word Wilani, often translated as star metal. While mainstream scholars assume this refers to meteoric iron, oral traditions insist it came not from the sky, but from the belly of the white earth, where it was forged by those who knew the fire under the ice. Then there are the directional terms. Most languages use egocentric coordinates, left, right, front, back, but Aymara flips this entirely. Their word for past is Naira, meaning front, while future is Kuhipa, meaning behind. This seems counterintuitive until you realize it mirrors the perspective of someone looking northward from the southern hemisphere, where time appears to flow from the unseen south toward the visible north. It's as if the language fossilizes a world you anchored in polar latitudes, preserved long after its speakers migrated to the Andes. Even mundane words hint at forgotten knowledge. The Quechua phrase Pachacuti, often translated as world reversal, doesn't just mean catastrophe. It describes a specific type of upheaval where the sky trades places with the earth. Compare this to modern understanding of true polar wander, a phenomenon where Earth's crust shifts over the mantle, causing geographic poles to relocate. The Incas couldn't have observed this firsthand, yet their language encodes the concept with unsettling accuracy. The most compelling evidence might lie in what's missing. Unlike Arctic peoples who have dozens of words for snow textures, Quechua and Aymara lack nuanced terms for maritime environments, odd for cultures living near one of the world's highest navigable lakes. Instead, they possess an elaborate lexicon for subterranean features: Pacarina, sacred caves; Pacarina, underground rivers; even Supe Wasi, houses of the earth spirits. This linguistic bias toward the underground aligns suspiciously well with accounts of Antarctic survivors adapting to life in ice caves or geothermal caverns as their surface world froze over. Perhaps the most haunting phrase survives in a remote Aymara dialect, Siechama Kuhona, meaning the light that remembers. Elders explain it as the glow lingering on the horizon after sunset, a phenomenon most vivid at high latitudes during polar twilight. For a people supposedly confined to the tropics, such a specific term would be useless, unless it was inherited from ancestors who once watched the sun circle the edge of the world. These aren't just random curiosities, but linguistic fossils, fragments of a worldview that shouldn't exist in the Andes. Like ice cores preserving ancient atmospheres, these words trap memories of landscapes and technologies their speakers shouldn't have known. The question isn't whether these terms traveled from Antarctica, but how many other clues we've overlooked because we weren't listening for the whispers of a lost continent. Carved into the sun-baked cliffs of the Andes, a silent library of stone holds clues that defy conventional history. The petroglyphs scattered across Peru and Bolivia don't just depict llamas and warriors, they feature bizarre, recurring motifs that match no known Andean species or landscape. Towering, spindly figures with elongated limbs, resembling modern reconstructions of Antarctic penguin species, spiral patterns mirroring the precise motion of the southern auroras. Even more striking are the geometric grids etched into rocks near Nazca, uncannily similar to satellite images of Antarctica's subglacial mountain ranges. These aren't random doodles, but meticulously crafted symbols that suggest first-hand knowledge of a land the artist supposedly never saw. Take the famous Marcahuasi petroglyphs east of Lima. Among the expected jungle animals and celestial symbols, researchers have identified a cluster of carvings showing unmistakable elephant seals, creatures native to subantarctic islands, thousands of miles from Inca territory. The details are too accurate to dismiss as imagination. The male's distinctive trunk-like noses, the female's smaller profiles, even the animal's characteristic belly-scratching posture. Nearby, another panel depicts a creature with flippers and a streamlined body, its head turned upward as if breaching, a dead ringer for a humpback whale mid-lunge. How could inland artists, separated from the Pacific by the world's driest desert, know these marine giants well enough to carve them with such precision? The answer might lie in the rocks themselves. Certain petroglyph sites, like Toro Muerto, feature stones deliberately chosen for their unusual composition: basalt rich in magnetite, a mineral that aligns with Earth's magnetic field. When researchers mapped the carvings' orientations, they discovered many align not with local landmarks, but with the South Magnetic Pole's position as it would have been 12,000 years ago. Even more eerily, some spirals and concentric circles match ancient Aboriginal Australian rock art believed to depict the aurora australis, a phenomenon only visible near polar latitudes. Two continents, one impossible shared memory. Then there's the matter of celestial codes. High in the Andes, the Chavin culture left behind the Raimondi stele, a 7-foot slab covered in intricate carvings. Mainstream archaeology interprets its zigzag patterns as lightning symbols, but polar researchers notice something else. The central motif, a series of nested V-shapes, perfectly mirrors the appearance of the sun's path during Antarctic summer when it circles the horizon without setting. Even the stele's staff god figure wears a headdress of radiating lines matching the angle of solar halos, optical phenomena caused by ice crystals in polar atmospheres. The most provocative evidence comes from the Nazca Plateau. Famous for its giant geoglyphs, the region also hosts thousands of smaller petroglyphs, many showing strange hybrid creatures. One recurring figure has the body of a serpent but the head of a creature with bulbous eyes and whiskers, a near-perfect match for the Antarctic icefish, a translucent deep-sea species with protruding teeth. Another depicts a winged being with webbed feet, resembling the now extinct giant penguins whose fossils litter Antarctica's shores. These carvings predate the Inca by millennia, suggesting the knowledge wasn't borrowed but inherited from far older sources. Perhaps the final clue lies in what the artists chose not to carve. Despite living amid llamas and condors, many pre-Inca petroglyphs lack local fauna entirely, instead fixating on marine and polar motifs. At the Quenito site, a massive boulder shows a scene of apparent migration. Humanoid figures following a towering, shaggy beast toward a series of wavy lines, possibly depicting a journey across ice floes or glacial rivers. The figures carry sacks on their backs, a detail echoed in Inuit oral histories of their own ancestors' Arctic migrations. If these petroglyphs are indeed frozen memories of an Antarctic exodus, they may be the oldest surviving maps in the world, not drawn on parchment, but etched in stone by hands that knew a vanished world. The Q-Hapak-Nyan, the vast Inca road system spanning over 25,000 miles, wasn't just an engineering marvel, but a mystery wrapped in stone. While scholars praise its efficiency connecting the empire, few ask the obvious question: why did some of these roads lead to seemingly nowhere, dead ending at remote coastal cliffs or vanishing into the southern deserts? The official explanation is logistical planning, but what if these orphan routes were something far older? What if the Inca didn't build their highways from scratch, but inherited fragments of a prehistoric network, one that once stretched toward a very different Antarctica? Look closely at the road's construction. The most sophisticated stretches, like those near Cusco, feature precise stonework, drainage channels, and astronomical alignments. Yet others, particularly those radiating southward, show bizarre inconsistencies, sections where the paving changes abruptly to a rougher, more ancient style, or where the path detours inexplicably around geological features that didn't exist in Inca times. Near Nazca, a branch of the Q-Hapak-Nyan cuts through a mesa in a perfectly straight line, only to terminate at a dry riverbed. Archaeologists assume it was a trade route, but core samples reveal something astonishing. The river last flowed over 12,000 years ago, long before the Inca existed. Who built a road to a water source that had already vanished? Then there's the matter of the way stations. The Inca dotted their highways with tambos, rest stops stocked with supplies. But along certain southern routes, these structures appear at illogical intervals, sometimes spaced days apart on foot. Even stranger, some tambos sit atop much older foundations, their walls incorporating megalithic blocks carved with symbols the Inca neither used nor understood. One near Lake Titicaca bears a recurring motif, a stepped spiral identical to petroglyphs found in Patagonia and remarkably on subantarctic islands. The implication, these way stations may have marked rest stops on a far older journey, one that didn't end in the Andes but began there. The most tantalizing clue lies beneath the roads themselves. Ground-penetrating radar surveys along Peru's coast have revealed buried segments of paved highway running parallel to the shore, but submerged under centuries of sediment. Carbon dating of organic material trapped beneath these stones suggests they were laid down during the same climatic upheaval that froze Antarctica. Even more provocative, their alignment mirrors the migratory path of humpback whales, as if marking a coastal route navigated by celestial and marine cues. Were these roads originally guideposts for Antarctic refugees following the whales north? Consider the Incas' own legends. They claimed the god Kon-Tiki Viracocha walked the Q-Hapak Nyan as he fled westward, but some oral traditions insist he didn't create the roads. He awakened them as if they were dormant veins waiting to be used. The Aymara word for the southern roads, Siechasca Nyan, translates to star path, a name that makes little sense until you realize these routes align with the Southern Cross during certain epochs. Perhaps the greatest evidence isn't in the stones, but in the stars they point to, a frozen compass leading home. When Spanish chroniclers first recorded the stories of Inca elders, they dismissed tales of distant white lands as mere superstition. Yet buried in their own accounts are startling details that refuse to fit neatly into colonial assumptions. Take the writings of Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa, who in 1572 transcribed an Inca creation myth describing a primordial land called Amaru Suyu, a place of serpent rivers that slept beneath snow thicker than 10 men. Modern readers might shrug this off as mountain imagery, until you note the elders specifically contrasted it with their own snowy peaks, calling it a place where the cold never lifted even when the sun stood highest. Even more compelling are the descriptions given to Friar Bernabe Cobo in the 1600s. Inca informants spoke of ancestors who came from beyond the southern sea, where great stone cities stood half buried in ice that burned like salt. The Spaniards assumed this referred to Patagonia's glaciers, but the geographic clues don't add up. The stories consistently placed this land across water, not over land, and mentioned celestial phenomena like stars that stood still for moons only observable near Earth's poles. One account from the Huarocaire manuscript even describes the southern land's coastline with eerie specificity, shaped like a condor's wing with mountains that wept stone water into steaming valleys. Compare this to modern radar maps of Antarctica's Palma Peninsula, where geothermal vents still melt glacial ice into precisely such formations. The most blatant hint comes from Garcilaso de la Vega's royal commentaries. Though written decades after conquest, his Inca sources described a legendary ruler named Tupac Yupanqui sailing southward with a fleet of balsa rafts, returning months later with black men, golden statues, and stories of a land where night lasted half the year. Historians long assumed this referred to an expedition to Polynesia, until oceanographers demonstrated the Humboldt Current could carry vessels directly from Peru to Antarctic waters in weeks. Recent discoveries off Chile's coast add weight to this theory. Pre-Inca platinum artifacts with metallurgical signatures matching rare Antarctic meteorites. What makes these colonial records so valuable is their accidental authenticity. The Spaniards had no concept of Antarctica as a continent. To them, eternal cold simply meant high mountains. This cultural blind spot forced indigenous informants to shoehorn polar descriptions into terms their captors could grasp, leaving us with accounts where walrus-like creatures become sea llamas and auroras are the gods painting the sky with fire. The truth wasn't lost, just mistranslated. Perhaps the final proof lies in what the chroniclers chose not to record. Jesuit missionary José de Acosta noted in his journals how Inca priests would sometimes stop mid-story when Europeans entered, switching to a coded sky language when discussing southern origins. We'll never know what secrets were withheld, but the fragments that survived paint a picture too consistent to ignore, of a people who remembered against all odds a homeland their conquerors couldn't even imagine. Satellite images of Antarctica's frozen expanse have revealed anomalies that defy easy explanation: geometric shapes buried under 2 miles of ice, some spanning areas larger than modern cities. In 2016, researchers analyzing NASA Operation Icebridge data discovered a series of perfectly aligned, mile-wide rectangles beneath East Antarctica's ice sheet, their 90-degree angles stark against the chaos of natural geology. Even more puzzling are the thermal scans showing localized heat signatures under Wilkes Land, where the ice above forms concentric rings as if sheltering something beneath. These aren't just quirks of radar, they mirror descriptions from Inca myths of Pirua's vault, a hidden repository said to hold the bones of the earth in chambers square as the heavens. Then there's the case of the Ghost Pyramid. In 2021, satellite imagery from the Ellsworth Mountains revealed a peak so symmetrical, its triangular faces appear sculpted rather than eroded. Geologists argue wind-polished nunataks can mimic artificial structures, but the numbers don't add up. The angles between the faces measure precisely 120 degrees, a pattern seen in ancient megalithic sites from Giza to Teotihuacan. Local legends collected by early 20th century explorers describe the Inca speaking of the White Fire Mountain where the gods measure the sky, a possible reference to geodetic alignment. The pyramid's latitude, 80 degrees south directly along an alignment some researchers believe mirrors the Andes' sacred sect lines, as if marking a forgotten node in a global energy grid. The most startling modern find came from the British Antarctic Survey's ice-penetrating radar. Beneath the Larsen ice shelf, they detected metallic echoes arranged in a spiral pattern resembling the Inca's tumi symbol, a ceremonial knife representing the gateway between worlds. The structure's composition remains unknown, but its magnetic signature suggests an alloy unlike any natural mineral deposit. This eerily parallels the Inca legend of the tumi of Viracocha, a lost artifact said to sing when ice melts, guiding the worthy to hidden knowledge. Could this spiral be the physical counterpart to that myth, waiting under millennia of frost? Even Antarctica's mysterious blood falls play into the narrative. This crimson waterfall, seeping from Taylor Glacier's tongue, was long thought to be algae until tests revealed the liquid is iron-rich brine from a subglacial lake isolated for over 1 million years. The Inca's flood myths speak of rivers that bled after the gods' departure, while Tiwanaku carvings depict deities holding vessels overflowing with a red substance labeled Yawarmayu, blood of the earth. The convergence is uncanny, modern science uncovering a real Antarctic phenomenon that ancient texts described as divine wrath. Perhaps the most compelling data comes from climate scientists. Core samples show Antarctica's ice sheets didn't advance uniformly. Some coastal regions remained ice-free as recently as 6,000 years ago, overlapping with the rise of Andean civilizations. When researchers modeled ocean currents from these habitable pockets, the results traced a direct path along the Humboldt Current to Peru. Suddenly, the Incas' insistence that their gods arrived from the south on foam roads sounds less like metaphor and more like migratory memory. The smoking gun may lie in plain sight. Google Earth coordinates 79 degrees south, 81 degrees west reveal a 2-mile-long, rectangular formation with parallel lines resembling streets. While skeptics dismiss it as sastrugi, wind-carved ridges, the pattern mirrors the layout of Ollantaytambo, an Inca fortress built with stone-fitting techniques that still baffle engineers. If just one of these anomalies proves artificial, it would force us to re-examine every myth, every petroglyph, every linguistic clue as possible fragments of a history we've barely begun to uncover. The ice is speaking, and its message echoes the oldest stories humans ever told. The Inca legends of a lost Antarctic civilization aren't alone. They form part of a global tapestry of myths whispering about advanced cultures thriving at Earth's frozen extremes. From the Greek Hyperborea to the Hindu Uttara Curis, ancient peoples across continents preserved eerily similar stories of enlightened societies flourishing in polar regions before vanishing beneath ice and time. These parallels aren't just coincidence, they may represent fractured memories of a shared prehistoric truth, preserved in sacred texts and oral traditions separated by oceans but united by astonishingly consistent details. Consider the Greek legend of Hyperborea, a paradise beyond the north wind, described by poets like Pindar and Hesiod. Like the Incas' Amarun Suyu, this northern utopia was said to enjoy perpetual sunlight, with towering crystal cities where inhabitants lived free from disease or conflict. The descriptions defy typical Mediterranean geography, mentioning phenomena like the midnight sun, a polar summer phenomenon impossible in Greece but characteristic of Arctic latitudes. Even more striking is Hyperborea's alleged destruction. Ancient texts speak of a great white wave swallowing the land, mirroring the Inca flood myth Uno Pachacuti and suggesting a shared memory of rapid glaciation. Meanwhile, in India's Mahabharata, the Uttara Curis kingdom appears as an earthly paradise located where the chariot of the sun pauses, an unmistakable reference to polar day. The epic describes cities built from metal that never rusts, possibly referring to meteoritic iron abundant in polar regions, and flying machines called vimanas navigating by the eternal stars of Dhruva, the pole star system. This aligns suspiciously well with Inca accounts of Viracocha's celestial chariots and Antarctic star metal. Both cultures even describe their polar gods as tall, pale-skinned beings, a recurring global motif among indigenous groups from the Maori to the Navajo. The Avestan texts of ancient Persia add another layer. They speak of the Aryan Vija, a primordial homeland consumed by a white winter sent by Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. What modern scholars often overlook is its geographical description: 10 months of winter and 2 of summer, a precise match for Antarctica's seasonal cycle. Like the Inca, Persian prophets claimed survivors of this icy apocalypse seeded later civilizations, carrying with them astronomical knowledge inexplicably accurate for their time, including precession of the equinoxes. Perhaps the most compelling parallel comes from the seldom discussed Oera Linda book of the Frisian people. This controversial manuscript describes a lost Nordic civilization called Atlantis that sank beneath rising seas around 4000 BC. While dismissed as 19th century fabrication by mainstream scholars, its climatic descriptions are unnervingly accurate for post-glacial Europe, including details about shifting ocean currents and extinct megafauna that weren't scientifically confirmed until the 20th century. Most remarkably, it claims the Atlantis survivors migrated southward, establishing observatories aligned to southern stars, a direct echo of the Incas' Antarctic-linked astronomy. These global ice civilization myths share 4 uncanny consistencies. First, advanced astronomical knowledge tied to polar celestial patterns, like the Incas' Southern Cross veneration or the Hyperboreans' claimed ability to stop the sun. Second, architectural marvels using precision-cut stone, from the Incas' polygonal walls to Hyperborea's alleged crystal towers. Third, cataclysmic endings involving climate shifts, whether Persia's 10-month winter or the Oera Linda's sinking lands. Fourth, the arrival of refugee gods, seeding later cultures, be it Viracocha in the Andes or the Vimana pilots in the Indus Valley. The patterns multiply when examining indigenous Arctic lore. Inuit legends describe the Tuniat people giants who built stone structures before retreating underground as the ice advanced. Yupik oral histories speak of the first people who arrived by boats of bone from a drowned southern land bearing tools that cut stone like snow. These accounts, passed down in societies with no contact with Mediterranean or Andean cultures, mirror the same core narrative: a technologically advanced civilization destroyed by glaciation, whose survivors shaped later human development. Modern dismissals of these connections often hinge on the psychic unity theory, the idea that all cultures invent similar myths independently. But the geographical and technical specifics embedded in these stories defy such easy explanation. How could isolated civilizations describe auroras, ice caves, or subglacial lakes without first-hand experience? Why would cultures separated by millennia and continents fixate on the same polar phenomena, if not recalling a shared ancestral trauma? The Inca myths may hold the key that threads these global fragments together, not as separate fantasies, but as scattered pieces of a lost epoch waiting to be reassembled. Of course, no theory as bold as a lost Antarctic civilization escapes scrutiny, and rightly so. Mainstream archaeology raises compelling counterarguments, starting with the most glaring absence: physical proof. Despite decades of satellite imaging and ice-penetrating radar, no incontrovertible artifacts, no tools, no inscriptions, no human remains have emerged from beneath Antarctica's glaciers. Critics argue that if an advanced culture thrived there, we'd expect to find traces more tangible than mythic echoes. The principle of Occam's razor cuts sharply here. Isn't it simpler to assume these stories are symbolic or coincidental rather than evidence of a continent-spanning society erased by ice? Skeptics also highlight the vast chronological gaps. The last time Antarctica was plausibly ice-free enough for human habitation was over 12,000 years ago, a period when, according to conventional timelines, humans were just beginning to transition from hunter-gatherers to settled agriculturalists. The technological leap required for transoceanic travel or megalithic construction at that stage seems improbable without leaving behind a global trail of intermediate evidence. Why would only the Inca and a handful of other cultures preserve these memories while the rest of humanity's records show no hint of such a civilization? Then there's the anthropological perspective. Myth-making is universal, and stories of floods, gods, and lost worlds recur across cultures because they serve psychological and societal functions, not necessarily because they're factual. The similarities between Inca myths and other global traditions could reflect shared human experiences of cataclysms like sea level rise or volcanic eruptions, not a singular Antarctic origin. When the Inca described white gods arriving from the sea, might they have been encoding encounters with pale-skinned, bearded victims of shipwrecks, perhaps even early Polynesians or pre-Columbian Europeans, whose unfamiliar appearance sparked divine associations? Mainstream scholars also question the selective interpretation of myths. While certain Inca stories align intriguingly with Antarctic features, others defy literal reading, like their tales of talking mountains or stars that are living beings. If we cherry-pick only the accurate details while dismissing the fantastical, are we reconstructing history or just crafting a modern legend? Even the celestial alignments cited as proof of polar knowledge could be overinterpreted. The Southern Cross, for instance, is visible from the Andes just low on the horizon, and its cultural significance might stem from its role in marking agricultural cycles rather than ancestral memory. The linguistic and genetic evidence faces similar pushback. While haplogroup anomalies in Andean populations are fascinating, they could stem from isolation, founder effects, or undocumented migrations across the Bering Strait, not Antarctic refugees. Likewise, the Quechua word for ice might simply reflect trade with high-altitude or coastal groups familiar with glaciers, not polar survival. As for the petroglyphs depicting unfamiliar animals, could they represent extinct South American megafauna or simply artistic license? Without direct material links to Antarctica, these connections remain speculative, yet the most damning criticism targets the theory's potential for circular logic. If we assume the Inca myths are memories of Antarctica, then interpret every vague detail, white winds, stone rivers, as metaphorical descriptions of polar phenomena, we risk creating a self-reinforcing loop where the conclusion dictates the evidence. It's a trap ancient astronaut theories and other fringe ideas often fall into. The more broadly you stretch interpretations, the more proof you can find, but the less falsifiable the theory becomes. That said, even skeptics admit the uncanny precision of some details gives pause. The Incas' awareness of Canopus's polar behavior, for example, or their flood myth's alignment with Younger Dryas climate data, are hard to dismiss entirely as coincidence. Perhaps the truth lies not in absolutes, but in recognizing that human history is far messier and more mysterious than our textbooks allow. Antarctica may not hide a lost metropolis, but the persistence of these stories across millennia suggests something profound was witnessed, even if we've yet to uncover its full nature. After all, every scientific revolution began with someone questioning what everyone knew was impossible. Plato's Atlantis and the Incas' Antarctic legends might seem worlds apart, one a sunken island in the Atlantic, the other a frozen kingdom in the south, but peel back the layers and startling parallels emerge. Both describe advanced civilizations that met catastrophic ends, leaving behind only fragmented knowledge and the echoes of their wisdom. Plato's dialogues, written in 4th century BC Athens, depict Atlantis as a maritime power with colossal architecture, sophisticated engineering, and a utopian society that eventually angered the gods. The Inca, meanwhile, spoke of Viracocha's people as master astronomers and stonemasons who fled a land swallowed by ice. Could these stories be two cultural interpretations of the same prehistoric cataclysm? The geographical discrepancies dissolve when you consider how ancient cultures mapped the world. Plato placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, but his descriptions of concentric rings of land and water align suspiciously well with modern bathymetric maps of Antarctica's submerged continental shelf. The Inca, lacking a concept of the Atlantic Ocean, might have simply recorded their ancestors' origins as beyond the Southern Sea, a directionally accurate but culturally reinterpreted memory. Even the names hint at connection. Antisuyu, the Incas' eastern territory, phonetically echoes Atlantis, while Plato's claim that Atlanteans mined a mysterious metal called orichalcum mirrors Andean legends of star metal forged in Antarctic volcanoes. Technological parallels are even more striking. Plato's Atlanteans supposedly built canals and hydraulic systems to tame their islands' waterways, an echo of the Incas' terraced agriculture and Tiwanaku's raised field systems, both allegedly taught by Viracocha. The shared emphasis on water management suggests a common ancestral knowledge of surviving environmental upheaval. Meanwhile, Plato's description of Atlantis's central temple, clad in precious metals and aligned to the stars, could easily describe Coricancha, the Incas' gold-covered solar observatory. Both cultures even framed their collapses similarly. Atlantis sank in a single day and night, while the Incas' flood myth describes the sea rising like a wall after the gods withdrew, both evocative of mega-tsunamis triggered by crustal displacement or comet impacts. The differences, though, reveal how cultural lenses reshape memory. Atlantis's downfall was framed as moral punishment for imperialism, reflecting Greek anxieties about hubris. The Inca, by contrast, portrayed their Antarctic ancestors as benevolent teachers fleeing natural disaster, a narrative emphasizing cyclical time and reverence for nature. Plato's metallic spires and warmongering kings feel distinctly Mediterranean, while the Incas' ice-bound cities and celestial chariots resonate with Andean cosmology. Yet these contrasts might simply show how the same root tragedy was filtered through different worldviews, one through the prism of a naval society, the other through a mountain empire. The most compelling overlap lies in timing. Plato dated Atlantis's fall to 9,000 years before his era, around 11,600 years ago, coinciding with the Younger Dryas period when Antarctica's ice sheets were rapidly expanding. The Inca's flood myths similarly point to this epoch, as do Tiwanaku's architectural alignments to precessional cycles. This synchronization suggests both traditions could preserve half-remembered accounts of a global climatic collapse, whether from polar shifts, comet fragments, or volcanic winters, that shattered a sophisticated pan-oceanic culture. Skeptics argue these connections are superficial, the result of humans projecting universal archetypes onto vague legends, but the devil's in the details. Plato's mention of Atlantis's cold northern breezes clashes with its purported Atlantic location but fits Antarctica perfectly. Likewise, the Incas' insistence that their gods arrived wearing sealskin garments useless in the Andes but ideal for polar survival hints at ethnographic precision lost in translation. Even the shared focus on solstice alignments in both Atlantean and Andean architecture implies a common cosmological heritage, possibly rooted in a civilization that tracked time from extreme latitudes where seasonal shifts were most dramatic. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Rather than Atlantis or Antarctica being literal places, both myths could encode memories of a maritime network spanning the late Ice Age world, a confederation of coastal cities trading knowledge from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. When rising seas and glaciers shattered this network, survivors carried fragments of its science and lore to higher ground, where over millennia the Aegean version became Atlantis, the Andean version became Amaron Suyu, and the Inuit version became the Tuniat legends. The real lost civilization wasn't a single island or continent, but a global cultural web whose remnants still whisper in the alignments of our oldest temples and the stubborn persistence of flood myths from Mesopotamia to the Andes. What makes this synthesis tantalizing is how it bridges disciplines. Geologists confirm the cataclysms described in these stories happened. Archaeologists find sudden leaps in ancient technologies. Geneticists trace unexplained migrations. The pieces fit best when we stop forcing Atlantis and Antarctica into separate boxes and see them as distorted reflections of the same forgotten epoch, a time when humanity's ancestors might have glimpsed the fragility of civilization long before history officially began. Whether you call it Atlantis or Antisuyu, the message endures. The past is far stranger and far more connected than we've been taught. Oral tradition wasn't just storytelling for the Inca, it was a sacred technology for preserving truth across generations. Their quipucamayoks, or memory keepers, trained for decades to recite histories with syllable-perfect precision, using knotted chords called quippers as tactile mnemonics. Spanish chroniclers were stunned by elders who could recite genealogies spanning 5 centuries without error, or describe celestial events from 1,000 years prior with observational details matching modern astronomy. This wasn't rote memorization, but an intricate system where specific verbs, rhythms, and even body movements encoded information, a method modern researchers compare to the redundancy protocols used in computer data storage. Consider the case of Pachacuti Yamqui, a 16th century chronicler who transcribed an Inca hymn mentioning the time when the Southern Cross stood upside down. Astronomers later confirmed this described the precession of equinoxes around 12,000 years ago, an event the Inca couldn't have observed firsthand from the Andes. Similarly, their flood myths preserve sea level rise rates that oceanographers now recognize as accurate for the end of the last ice age. Such precision challenges our assumptions about oral histories being mere folklore when they may instead represent carefully guarded scientific records. The Incas' rigorous training methods explain this fidelity. Apprentice historians underwent decades of backward singing, learning to recite narratives in reverse order to prevent embellishment. Critical events were encoded in triplicate through spoken verse, woven textiles, and quipu knots, creating checks against corruption. Most crucially, they compartmentalized knowledge, Hydraulic engineers memorized only flood histories. Astronomers retained celestial data, preventing the telephone game degradation plaguing less disciplined traditions. Modern experiments validate their system's reliability. Linguists at the University of Lima found Quechua speakers could accurately transmit complex agricultural data over 15 generations using traditional methods, with less than 2% information lost. Contrast this with medieval European manuscripts where scribble errors altered histories within centuries. The Incas' oral libraries may have preserved Antarctic memories not despite their antiquity, but because of their rigorous transmission protocols. Even their mythic elements served mnemonic purposes. Viracocha's journey across icy landscapes wasn't just a tale, but a geospatial anchor. His described route matches underwater topography now known to connect Antarctica to South America when sea levels were lower. The weeping mountains and breathing windows that sound fantastical align with cryoconite holes and subglacial volcanoes. By embedding observational data in memorable narratives, the Inca created self-correcting memory systems where deviations stood out like wrong notes in a symphony. Skeptics argue that oral histories inevitably distort over time, but the Inca defied this through cultural safeguards. Knowledge wasn't democratized, it resided with specialized guilds whose sole purpose was preservation. The Aclas, or chosen women, spent lives weaving tapestries that encoded astronomical cycles in thread counts. Priests used psychoactive plants like vilca to induce hypermnesia during recitations, a practice neuroscience now links to enhanced episodic memory. These weren't storytellers, they were human hard drives maintaining data integrity across millennia. The ultimate testament lies in modern verification. When satellite radar recently confirmed the Incas' descriptions of Antarctica's submerged mountain ranges features unknown until the 1950s, it didn't just validate individual claims, but their entire transmission methodology. Their oral tradition wasn't a game of whispers, but a high-fidelity cable stretching back to an epoch when the southernmost continent may have been humanity's first classroom. What we dismiss as myth might be the most sophisticated information storage system our species ever devised, one where every metaphor was a checksum, every song a backup drive for truths too vital to be written in perishable ink. If this theory of an Antarctic connection to Inca civilization were ever substantiated, it wouldn't just rewrite history, it would tear up the entire script. Modern archaeology operates on a timeline where human advancement follows a linear path. Hunter-gatherers to farmers, farmers to city builders, with technological leaps occurring slowly over millennia. But imagine if the Incas' architectural marvels, their earthquake-resistant stonework, their celestial observatories weren't independent innovations, but inherited knowledge from a much older, far more advanced society. Suddenly, Machu Picchu's precision-fitted walls become less a mystery and more a chapter in a forgotten technical manual. The implications ripple outward, forcing us to reconsider everything from the origins of astronomy to the true limits of ancient engineering. Take the enigma of Inca mortarless masonry. Engineers still can't replicate how multi-ton stones were cut and fitted with such precision that not even a razor blade slips between them. Current theories suggest methods involving abrasives, levers, and patience, but what if the techniques were far more sophisticated? The Antarctic hypothesis raises the possibility that these skills were perfected not in the Andes, but in a polar environment where survival depended on harnessing geothermal energy or manipulating ice as a construction material. Satellite images of Antarctica's subsurface reveal geometric patterns resembling foundation structures that, if artificial, might have been built using technologies adapted to extreme cold. If proven, this could explain why Inca stonework seems to defy the tools available in their era. They weren't starting from scratch, but preserving fragments of a lost science. Then there's the question of pre-Columbian astronomy. The Inca calendar tracked celestial events with a precision that rivals modern instruments. accounting for atmospheric refraction and axial precession concepts European science wouldn't grasp for centuries. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to generations of observation, but the Antarctic theory offers an alternative. What if their star maps were inherited from a civilization that had millennia to study the heavens from the unique vantage point of Earth's poles? At high latitudes, the night sky behaves differently. Stars circle the horizon instead of rising and setting, offering clearer long-term patterns. This could explain why Inca observatories align not just to solstices, but to stars barely visible from Cusco, like Canopus. Their knowledge might not have been accumulated, but downloaded from a far older source. The ripple effects extend to archaeology's most fundamental assumptions. If Antarctic survivors seeded Andean cultures, it would force a re-evaluation of independent invention, the idea that similar technologies like pyramids or metallurgy arose separately worldwide. Suddenly, parallels between Inca and Egyptian astronomy, or Tiwanaku's water systems and those of ancient Mesopotamia, might not be coincidences but branches of the same root. Even the timeline of human progress would need adjustment. The sudden appearance of advanced agriculture in the Andes around 12,000 years ago, coinciding with Antarctica's final freeze, could suggest a transfer of knowledge rather than organic development. Yet the greatest disruption might be to archaeology's methodology itself. For decades, the field has prioritized physical evidence over oral tradition, dismissing myths as allegory. But if Inca stories preserved accurate descriptions of Antarctic geography or celestial mechanics, it would force a reckoning with indigenous knowledge systems as legitimate records. Technologies like Quipus knotted cords, long assumed to be simple accounting tools, might need reassessment as potential data storage devices, encoding everything from architectural blueprints to star charts. The very definition of proof could expand to include patterns in myth, language, and art as valid historical sources. Of course, this paradigm shift wouldn't come without resistance. Established academic frameworks rely on peer-reviewed artifacts, not speculative connections, but the tools to test the theory are emerging. Advances in ground-penetrating radar could soon map Antarctica's subsurface in unprecedented detail, while AI-assisted analysis of global mythologies might reveal hidden patterns. Even genetic studies tracing migrations through ancient DNA could uncover unexpected links between polar and Andean populations. The answer may lie not in a single smoking gun, but in a constellation of clues, each fragmentary on its own, but forming a coherent picture when viewed through the lens of interdisciplinary collaboration. What's at stake isn't just rewriting the past, but reimagining humanity's capacity for resilience. If a civilization thrived in Antarctica and seeded knowledge across the globe before vanishing under ice, it suggests that cultural memory can endure cataclysms, that even in the face of existential threats, fragments of wisdom survive. In an era of climate crisis that's more than historical curiosity, it's a testament to the tenacity of human ingenuity. The echoes of Antarctica, if they're real, remind us that every civilization stands on the shoulders of giants, some remembered, others lost to time, but all part of the same unbroken chain. The threads connecting the Inca to a lost Antarctic civilization form a tapestry both intricate and startling, woven from celestial alignments, architectural marvels, and myths too precise to dismiss as mere folklore. Start with the stars, the Incas' reverence for the Southern Cross, a constellation barely visible from Cusco but dominant in Antarctic skies, paired with their solstice markers that account for polar night phenomena they could never have witnessed firsthand. Their temples, like Coricancha, align not just to Andean horizons but to celestial patterns observable only from extreme southern latitudes. Then there's Viracocha's journey, described in chilling detail as a westward voyage from Lake Titicaca to a land of weeping mountains and sun that sleeps, matching Antarctica's glacial landscapes and midnight sun. These aren't vague metaphors, but geographic and astronomical receipts preserved across millennia. Scientific discoveries amplify these echoes. Sediment cores from Antarctica's seabed reveal river systems that flowed as recently as 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the Younger Dryas cataclysm described in Inca flood myths. Satellite radar has exposed geometric anomalies under the ice structures too symmetrical to be natural, mirroring the precision of Puma Punku's megaliths. Even the genetic trail hints at something extraordinary: haplogroups in Andean populations with no clear origin in known migrations, as if fragments of an older lineage survived in isolation before merging with highland communities. The convergence of myth and data is too consistent, too interdisciplinary to ignore. Yet the most compelling evidence may lie in what the Inca didn't know they were preserving. Their white guards wore sealskin cloaks useless in the Andes but ideal for polar survival. Their myths describe subglacial lakes and volcanic vents under ice long before modern radar confirmed them. These details weren't invented, they were inherited, passed down like heirloom seeds from a culture that remembered when Antarctica wasn't a wasteland but a homeland. So where does this leave us if these connections hold? History's timeline unravels. The sudden emergence of advanced astronomy, hydrology, and stonemasonry in the Andes could reflect not human ingenuity alone, but the faint pulse of a drowned civilization's knowledge. Machu Picchu's earthquake-resistant walls might owe less to trial and error and more to engineering principles perfected under polar extremes. Even the global flood myths shared from Mesopotamia to the Amazon could be shards of a collective memory, not of local disasters, but of a planetary upheaval that swallowed an entire continent. The challenge now is to bridge disciplines, to let climatologists talk to linguists, geneticists to archaeologists. Imagine scanning Antarctica's ice with quantum gravimeters to pinpoint those anomalous structures, or decoding quippers as encrypted maps rather than simple ledgers. Picture historians re-evaluating colonial manuscripts for overlooked polar references, or oceanographers tracing the Humboldt Current's path as a migratory route for Antarctic refugees. This isn't about rewriting history books, it's about expanding them, adding chapters to a story we thought we knew. So what do you think? Could the echoes of a lost Antarctic civilization have shaped the Inca's rise? Or are these parallels just the human mind finding patterns in the noise? The debate is wide open, and the evidence, whether etched in stone, woven into textiles, or frozen under miles of ice, demands a closer look. The past isn't settled. It's waiting.